My daughter slammed her fist on the table and screamed, "Asterisk, sell the house and disappear." Asterisk, her eyes burned with fury. But she didn't know what was hidden behind these walls, or the secret her father left for her. What happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. It was a Sunday afternoon when my daughter, Emily, slammed her fist on the kitchen table, her voice ricocheting off the walls of the old family home. "Sell the house and disappear, Mom. Just take the money and leave us alone." Her words cut through me like glass. This wasn't just a house. It was the place where my late husband, Richard, and I had raised her. Every corner whispered with his memory. The pencil marks on the doorframe where we tracked Emily's height, the hairline crack in the ceiling he always swore he'd fix, the rose garden he planted for me on our 10th anniversary. The house held our arguments and our reconciliations, the year the furnace quit in January, and we slept in the living room by the fireplace, the summer the kitchen pipes burst, and Richard taught Emily to hold a flashlight steady like a surgeon. It held our ordinary days, the real ones you never think will matter until they're gone. Emily stood across from me in a slate-gray blazer, city polish wrapped tight over the girl who used to beg for one more bedtime story. Her jaw was set in a way that made me think of her father when he'd made up his mind about something. The kitchen clock, a cheap square thing we bought at the hardware store after the old one broke, ticked too loudly, as if it had been waiting its whole life to witness this moment. The kettle hissed on the stove, the burner left on low. I didn't touch it. I couldn't move. "Why would you say that?" I asked, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. Her answer was sharper than the first blow. "Because you're stuck in the past, and I refuse to live in your shadow. Sell this place and move on, or better yet, disappear." The word disappear did not belong in our kitchen. It didn't fit with the smudged switch plates and the sun-faded fruit bowl or the little chip in the formica where Emily's science fair volcano once bumped the edge. It didn't fit with the iron skillet seasoned by decades of breakfasts or the stack of feastware plates I bought one by one, on sale, in different colors. Disappear. I had been here all along, paying the taxes, oiling the front door hinges, wiping the fog from the bathroom mirror. Grief doesn't disappear. It settles like dust along the baseboards and inside the seams of your winter coat. Emily's nostrils flared. Anger or fear? I couldn't tell. Maybe both. She had always been hungry for movement and light, drawn to the city like it was a stage and everyone else was a temporary audience. She wanted momentum, a calendar filled with meetings, a life that did not pause to pin a birthday card to the refrigerator with a magnet from some long-ago beach. When her father died 3 years ago, she arranged the memorial with ruthless grace, checking boxes, confirming the flowers, selecting a portrait where Richard wore the navy tie I always loved. She'd given the eulogy like a glass blade, no tremble, no break. People said how strong she was. I thought so too then. But strength can turn brittle if you keep it clenched for too long. "I'm not your shadow," I said. "I'm your mother." She laughed once, a short, airless sound. Exactly. Silence cracked open between us. A neighbor's lawn-mower droned faintly beyond the kitchen window. On the table, next to my teacup, lay the county envelope with the new property tax notice, numbers that made my stomach clench, and the laminated insurance card I kept meaning to tuck back into my wallet. Domestic clutter, proof that life continued even when it felt like a door had slammed on it. I watched a loose thread on the cuff of her blazer quiver as her hand trembled. She tucked it into her palm, schooling the tremor out of sight. "M," I said, and the old nickname softened something in me. "Sit down a minute. Please." "I can't," she answered, looking everywhere but at me. "I have a showing across town and a call in 20 minutes. I shouldn't have had to drive out here to force this conversation. You didn't. I began and then stopped because she had. She had forced it by bringing the one thing I couldn't bear to argue over. The roof over my head, the rooms where I could still hear Richard's cough in the winter, his whistling when he trimmed the hedges. The house had weight. It pressed into my shoulders and lifted me at the same time. It was grief and anchor and shelter, the kind that makes you believe, foolishly or not, that as long as you can find your way to your own front door, you are not lost. Mom, she said, the word knuckled white with urgency, you can take the equity, buy a condo downtown near me, and stop rattling around out here alone. You could have a doorman, an elevator, grocery delivery. It's practical. Why is that so hard for you to understand? I could picture the condo as she spoke. Square footage that would fit inside our living room, a balcony that faced another balcony. Practical, yes. Sterile, too. I knew what she didn't say. She did not want to drive to the old house after long days and walk into rooms that still smelled like the cologne her father wore, that caught at her sleeves with laced shadows from the banister after sunset. To her, the house wasn't a shrine. It was a trap that reopened wounds every time she visited. In her mind, selling it would cauterize something that refused to heal. On paper, it made sense. In the marrow, it didn't. I tried to stand straighter. This is my home. She bristled. It was our home. You don't get to keep it like a trophy. The cruelty of that surprised me so much I almost sat down. A trophy. The word made me think of dust and display, triumph pinned like a butterfly to a board. There were trophies in the den, yes. Emily's second place for long jump, Richard's bowling league plaque, but they were jokes now, relics. This house wasn't a display of anything. It was a working thing, a breathing thing. Houses are like that, if you live in them long enough. They'd learn your footsteps. They'd loosen their bones to fit your life. You're upset, I said, careful as walking with a full pot of soup. I'm focused, she snapped, and then something inside her faltered. Her gaze slid to the sink, to the window above it. The backyard beyond lay in late afternoon light, Richard's roses a little wild because my knees hadn't liked the crouching this year. A bee threaded through a blossom as if nothing on earth had changed. Her mouth softened, only for a breath. She shook it away. I'm not doing this. She reached for her bag. Emily. I heard myself say her name the way I had when she was 5 and considering crossing the street without holding my hand. It stopped her at the doorway, not because the sound was powerful, but because memory can do what arguments can't. For a moment she wasn't a woman in a blazer. She was a girl in jelly sandals with a pink barrette sliding out of her hair. She pressed her lips together. This place is a mausoleum, she said quietly. It's a home, I said just as quietly. Her shoulders rose and fell. The clock ticked into the space between us. I could smell the tea turning bitter on the stove. She didn't move to turn off the burner. Neither did I. It felt, absurdly, like an act of surrender either way. When she finally spoke, her voice had the worn edge of someone who's been rehearsing a speech for hours. I can't come here anymore and pretend it's fine. Every time I walk in, I feel like I'm suffocating under things that don't belong to me. You've made your grief into a house I have to live in, too. I swallowed. You don't have to live here. That's not the point, she said, and I knew she meant holidays, birthdays, the inevitable family rituals that orbit a house like moths around a porch light. She meant the way places insist on being part of your life whether you invite them or not. She meant that love can feel like an obligation when you haven't learned how to carry it. She brushed a stray hair behind her ear. The gesture was tender, almost. 1,000 mothers must recognize that tiny movement, the automatic self-steadying when emotion threatens to spill. It made my own hands ache to reach out, but I did not. The distance between us had turned precise, measurable, like a line a surveyor might lay across a yard before a fence goes up. "Sell it," she said again, softer this time, a plea twisted into a command. "Please." I didn't know whether to cry or scream. Instead, I stayed silent, the way people do in hospitals when they've been told to wait in the hallway. I watched my daughter, my only child, turn toward the back door, pausing just long enough to drop her keys into her bag. She did not slam the door as she left. It clicked shut with the politeness of a stranger leaving a dinner party early. The kettle began to rattle. I took it off the heat and poured the water down the sink, watching steam rise and fade in the sunlight. The sound reminded me of rain in the gutters of summer storms that used to send Emily racing downstairs to count seconds between thunder and lightning with Richard. My hand shook. I set the kettle down more carefully than it needed. In the quiet, the house settled, those little pops and sighs wood makes when temperature shifts and a draft moves unhindered through a hallway. I could hear the refrigerator hum, the softness of the furnace cycling, even though winter had months to go. I stood there and let the ordinariness press against me until my pulse steadied enough to breathe without tasting iron. On the table lay the tax bill, the insurance card, a grocery list I'd started in pencil. Milk, coffee, sandpaper for the porch rail. My eyes drifted to the doorframe, to the notches and the dates in my handwriting. Emily, 3rd grade -4 feet 2. Emily, 7th -5 feet. A history of growth carved into pine. A small, ridiculous thing, and suddenly the most important artifact in a world that 1 minute earlier had cracked open and shown me an emptiness I had not expected to see. I pulled out a chair and sat down, laying my palm against the table where Emily's fist had struck. The wood was warm. Beneath my hand, I could feel the faint tremor of my own heartbeat. I pressed harder, as if to keep it from wandering away. Outside, a dog barked twice and then gave up. A car door shut somewhere up the street. The afternoon folded itself into the house the way it always did, light sliding along the countertops, making the stainless sink look almost like water. I thought of calling someone, my sister, maybe, or the woman from church who drops off casseroles after surgeries, but the thought passed. There are words you can't trust your mouth to carry, not yet. There are moments a person has to sit inside alone, like a chapel with no service, pews empty and waiting. It would be easy to say I was angry. I was. Anger arrived like a match struck in a dark room. But beneath it moved something heavier and older, a sediment of hurt that had taken its time forming. I'd given my daughter a childhood under this roof. I'd given her patience on nights when algebra refused to make sense, and money I didn't have for a class trip to Washington, and my good scarf when her date arrived without a proper coat. Love is not an invoice, I know. Yet, as I sat there, I felt the strange, human urge to tally what a person has poured out, and what's been poured back. The tally led nowhere, as tallies of love always do. I picked up the tax envelope, smoothed it flat, put it back down. I breathed. I let the clock tick. I let the room return to itself, and me to myself, in the slow, uncompelling way life really does. I did not make a decision. Not then. Decisions belong to a different kind of hour. I only sat in my kitchen, the one Richard painted butter yellow because he said it made the mornings brighter, and listened to a house remember me. I put my hand over the place where Emily's fist had fallen, and I kept it there until the heat of my skin outlasted the echo of her words. For days, Emily's words followed me like an echo that refused to die. They clung to me in the stillness of the house, warmed their way into my dreams, and tainted even the smallest, most ordinary tasks. Washing dishes became an act of remembering her scowl. Folding laundry carried the aftertaste of her command: sell the house and disappear. Each room I entered seemed to replay her voice in the corners, daring me to admit that maybe she was right. Maybe I was a relic clinging to brick and wood because I had nothing else left to hold. But grief is a stubborn thing. It doesn't bend easily, and it doesn't surrender without a fight. This house wasn't just walls. It was a ledger of a life. The banister still bore the scratches of Richard's toolbox when he hauled it upstairs for the last time. The living room carpet had a darker patch where Emily, as a child, spilled grape juice, and we tried every remedy in the book until we learned to live with the stain. Even the air seemed layered: wood polish, garden soil, the faint musk of Richard's cologne woven so deeply into the closet that no number of empty hangers could erase it. Emily saw chains. I saw roots. To her, permanence was suffocation. To me, it was the only proof that love had once been real. Her ambition had always set her apart. Even as a teenager, she was the one volunteering for extra credit, determined to be seen as more than the daughter of. She carried her father's fire, but none of his patience. Richard, for all his drive, knew when to pause, when to let silence do the talking. Emily only knew forward motion. She couldn't stand still, couldn't stand to look back, because looking back meant acknowledging the fracture his death had left inside her. It was easier to project that wound onto the house, easier to blame brick and mortar than to admit she was afraid of grief swallowing her whole. But for me, the house was sanctuary. And beyond the comfort of memory, it guarded something deeper, something I had carried like a hidden stone ever since Richard's last night. I remember the sterile glow of hospital monitors, the antiseptic tang that clung to the air, the way his hand, once strong enough to lift our daughter high above his shoulders, lay frail and trembling in mine. He hadn't spoken much in those final hours. The illness had stolen his breath in small, cruel increments. But then, when I leaned close, he whispered with all the force he could summon, "When the time is right, the truth will be in the house." The words lived in me like a riddle with no key. I turned them over in quiet moments, searching for meaning. Sometimes I wondered if grief had invented them, if my ears, desperate to hear his voice, had conjured a puzzle where none existed. Yet, as Emily's demand rang through me, "Sell, disappear," the words resurfaced with new weight. Maybe he had foreseen this moment. Maybe he had left something behind, not for her, not even for me, but for the day when the foundation of this family would begin to crack. That night, while the house was draped in silence and the neighborhood slept, I found myself standing at the basement door. My hand hesitated on the knob. That basement had always belonged more to Richard than to me, a place of workbenches, old cans of varnish, half-fixed projects, jars of nails and screws lined up like soldiers. After his death, I'd avoided it, as if descending those steps meant stepping into the hollow he'd left behind. But the weight of his final request pressed me forward. The hinges groaned as the door opened, the sound startlingly loud in the stillness. I flicked on the light, but the bulb overhead buzzed weakly, casting more shadow than glow. The air smelled of cedar left to dry, rust curling off forgotten tools, and a dampness that clung to the walls like sorrow. Dust stirred as I descended, each step a protest against years of avoidance. The wooden stairs creaked beneath my weight, and for a moment I felt like an intruder in my own home. I moved slowly, tracing the edges of the space with my eyes. The familiar outlines of Richard's workshop greeted me. The scarred oak workbench, the red toolbox with its dented lid, the jars of screws sorted by size. His handwriting still marked masking tape labels, 3-inch nails, copper wire, washers. A lifetime of careful order, now untouched. Something in me knew not to stop at the obvious. His words, "The truth will be in the house," spurred me deeper. I felt an invisible thread tugging me toward the far wall, the one with the uneven paneling. Richard had spent hours there, long after Emily and I had gone to bed, hammering, measuring, sometimes whistling softly as if to keep himself company. I remembered asking once what he was building, and he'd smiled, evasive. Just fixing what's broken. The paneling looked ordinary, but memory has its own way of marking things. My fingers found the faintest looseness in one board, the way it shifted under pressure, just enough to suggest it was not entirely attached. Dust gathered beneath my nails as I pressed harder, heart thudding like a drum in my chest. The board groaned, then gave way with a reluctant creak. Behind it, tucked into the hollow of the wall, was a small chest. It was made of dark wood, edges worn smooth with time, the brass latch dulled but intact. A lock gleamed faintly, though tarnished with years of waiting. The sight of it sent a tremor through me, a ripple of both fear and recognition. My breath hitched as if I had stumbled on Richard himself, standing there in the shadows, asking me if I was ready. My hands shook as I lifted it out, the weight surprising me. It was heavier than it looked, as though secrets themselves had mass. I set it on the workbench, my reflection faint in the sheen of its brass. My fingertips lingered on the cool surface of the lock. I did not open it. Not yet. The discovery itself was enough to fill the air with tension, as though the house had been holding its breath and had finally exhaled. The truth Richard had promised lay within reach, but its silence seemed to ask me a question. Are you sure you want to know? I stood there in the dim basement light, chest before me, hands trembling, heart pounding in my ears. And for the first time since Emily's shout shattered the air upstairs, I felt the foundation of my world shift, not in collapse, but in revelation. The cracks she had accused me of living under were real, but they were not signs of weakness. They were doorways, and one had just opened. The lid yielded with a hushed sigh, as if the wood had been waiting to breathe in my presence. Inside, order met me, Richard's kind of order, the kind that made sense in his hands before anyone else could see the system. Bundles lay nested like sleeping birds, envelopes tied with twine, legal folders with the corners burnished soft, a thin ledger whose pages were bowed by use. The faint scent of cedar lifted from the grain, mingled with paper that had learned patience, with ink that had surrendered its shine to time. On top were documents that spoke in a language of signatures and seals. The deed to the house, carefully sleeved in plastic. Insurance policies he'd switched the year before his diagnosis, annotated in his tidy block letters. Compare premiums, don't overpay. A stack of savings bonds, staggered by year, their edges serrated, each one a small vote for a future he believed we would reach. There were receipts gathered into a manila envelope, stamped with dates that mapped our leanest seasons. Hospital copays, prescription slips, the check stub from the day he sold his old fishing boat, the one he promised he'd fix next spring. I remembered that day, the way he joked about the buyer getting a bargain, how he patted the gunwale as if it were a dog that would find its way home. I had not known where the money went. Now I did. He had been building a raft out of paper, trying to keep us both above the current. Beneath the ledgers and policies lay a small parcel wrapped in velvet, gone the color of river stones. The nap was thin, almost slick from fingers long vanished. My thumb found the seam. The knot gave. The ring lay in my palm with the weight of a whispered name. Richard's grandmother's ring, the one with the oval sapphire that looked like night made small, held in a slender halo of diamonds that remembered a gentler century. I had thought it lost forever years ago in the muddle of a move, conjured into absence by a single distracted hour. I remembered turning drawers inside out, sobbing in the doorframe, the way Richard had held me, and said perhaps it was time to let old things travel where they needed. He had known better. He had kept it, Not from me. I understood now, but for something neither of us could yet see. The gold was warm against my skin. In the basement's thin light, the stone did not glitter, it glowed. But it was the letters that stopped me the way a truth can stop a person, without noise, without spectacle, with a stillness that reorganizes the air. There were a dozen, maybe more, bound with a ribbon that had once been red and now lived somewhere between rust and brown. Each envelope bore a date from his last months, a slow calendar of dwindling strength. The slant of his handwriting tilted more as the weeks passed, but it never lost its careful dignity. My name wasn't on a single one. The first was addressed in the way he wrote when he wanted to be formal and tender at once. For Emily. I sat on the stool at the workbench and slid a fingernail under the flap. Paper rasped. The house above me seemed to listen. Emily, it began, the loop of the E shore, the M lifted like a little bridge. I know you are strong, but strength can become cruelty if you do not remember love. This house will one day test you. Hidden here is proof that love lasts longer than bitterness. When you doubt your mother most, she will show you this. And if you are wise, you will understand. I had to set the page down and press my fingertips to my eyelids until the salt stung. The voice in the lines was his, not the diminished whisper of the hospital, but the voice that used to call down the hall for Sunday breakfast, that lectured the lawn mower with mock gravity, that read Charlotte's Web aloud until Emily fell asleep with her cheek on his knee. He had written knowing that time would thin him. He had written knowing we would need him when he could no longer be called. I lifted the second letter. When I was your age, he wrote, I mistook speed for purpose. I thought moving fast would outrun the ache that lived in my chest after my own father died. It did not. I ran past the people who wanted to walk beside me. Don't do that. Don't let your fear of standing still become a habit of leaving. The words sat simple and enormous, a carpenter's advice to a daughter he recognized because he had once built himself to the same pattern. Another envelope held something thinner, 2 pressed petals, brown as tea, folded in tissue. Roses from the first bush he planted after Emily was born. The letter with them was dated late autumn, the month he started sleeping downstairs because the steps winded him. These were from the day you took your first steps on the lawn. You fell, and you looked at me as if I had betrayed you for letting the ground exist. Then you laughed at the grass. Remember that. The ground is not your enemy. A page later, ink had blotted at the margin where his hand must have trembled. I did not tell you enough that ambition is a tool, not a shelter. A house is a shelter. This house is our shelter. It is made of boards, yes, but also of our hours. Some of those hours were loud. Some were unremarkable. A life is mostly made of unremarkable hours that become irreplaceable once they are gone. I read until the lines blurred, then read again. He had written to Emily when the night nurses walked their rounds, when the monitors steadied into their small electric hens, when he would have once been in this basement laying his hand over a board to feel if it had seated right. He wrote confession and instruction in equal measure. He apologized once for the argument they had in her last year of college, the one that sent her storming out with a suitcase and a pride she later called independence. I pushed because I knew he would push back, he wrote. I should have steadied, not shoved. I am proud of the life you have built, but pride without tenderness is a brittle thing. Temper it. Tucked between the letters was a photocopy of a cashier's check I had never known about, made out to the university bursar's office the spring her scholarship fell short. He had covered the difference without telling either of us, without drama, without a single remark about sacrifice. On the bottom he had written, almost as an afterthought, if you ever think love is mostly talk, look up the numbers. Love leaves a paper trail, too. I found a photograph, edges scalloped, the kind taken in drugstore booths when the world was still analog and patient. Richard held a newborn Emily in the crook of his arm. His hair was too long, his grin ungoverned. On the back, in his hand, she smelt like biscuits. Below it, smaller, I would live in a tent to keep her safe. The letters returned, over and over, to the house, not as a monument, not as a museum, but as a vessel. He described the hidden nail in the third stair that had snagged every sock he owned until he sank it flush. He listed the joists he sistered after the flood in 08, the way the foundation had settled a 1/4 inch on the east corner, and how he had shimmed it patient as prayer. "If you stand here long enough," he wrote, "you'll learn that keeping a house sound is 1,000 small decisions done quietly. Marriage is that. Parenthood is that. You won't get applause for most of it. Do it anyway." I came to a letter dated 2 weeks before he died. The ink had paled, as if even color knew how to leave. "If your mother shows you these, it will be because the day has come when anger feels easier than love. Anger is light in the hand and loud in the mouth. Love is heavier, but it holds. I am not asking you to be sentimental about wood. I am asking you to honor the labor that keeps weather where it belongs. That labor is your mother." The basement's light flickered once, then steadied. I looked up, half expecting to see him at the bottom of the stairs, a wrench in his hand, amusement veiling concern. Instead, there was only the quiet press of the room, the sacrament of tools waiting to be told what was needed. At the bottom of the stack, a shorter note lay untied, as if placed last with fingers already learning to let go. "You will want to run, Em. You always have. Run toward, not away. If you must sell anything, sell the hurry that makes you cruel. Keep what lets you remember. The ring is yours when you are ready. Give it to the woman you become, not the girl who is angry." I closed my eyes and saw the way Emily had stood in the kitchen. Perfectly. Good posture disguises so much. I heard again the clean, terrible click of the back door when she left. In the same instant, I felt something shift inside me, not a decision, not yet, but a settlement, like the house itself when wind decides to lean. He had not left me with a cudgel to win an argument. He had entrusted me with a compass. The proof he promised was not only the ring, not only the bonds or receipts. The proof was a record of steady, unspectacular love, laid out in lines any person with eyes could read. He had built a bridge from his last sentences to our next breath, and asked me to carry our daughter across when she refused to see it. I rewrapped the ring with care that felt ceremonial, returned documents to their folders, nested letters in their ribbon with the pages ordered as he intended. But I kept the first and the last out on the bench, side by side, the beginning of his counsel and its benediction. The concrete under my feet held a coolness that seeped through my soles, up my shins, a reminder that foundations do not apologize for being firm. On the overhead bulb a moth had begun to circle, batting itself against the glass, dizzy with the promise of heat. I watched it a long time, thinking of Emily's orbit, of the way bright things can lure us into bruising ourselves when we mistake nearness for belonging. I thought of Richard's hands steadying a board until the nail took true. I thought of the quiet arithmetic of marriage and mothering, of how love, to last, must often choose the invisible work. When I finally rose, it was with the letter to Emily still open on the table, my palms spread across the signature as if to hold it in place. The house above me was the same as the house below, beams shouldering weight, joints answering in tiny clicks, a structure that spoke in the only language it knew, hold, 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 until what threatened to come apart remembered how it fit. I gathered the letters against my chest and let them be a weight I would learn to carry. The next morning, Emily came again, impatient and furious. "Have you called the realtor yet?" Or are you dragging this out just to make me miserable?" I didn't raise my voice. Instead, I placed the letters in the velvet box on the table. Her anger faltered as she stared at them. "What is this?" "Your father's last words," I said softly. "He left them for you, hidden in this house. He wanted you to remember who you are before you let bitterness consume you." She hesitated, hands trembling as she unfolded the first letter. The kitchen grew silent but heavy, broken only by the sound of paper crinkling and her uneven breathing. When she reached the final words, tears spilled down her cheeks. I didn't know," she whispered. Her voice cracked with the weight of guilt. "I thought you were just clinging to the past. I didn't realize Dad left something for me. For us." I placed my hand gently over hers. "Emily, this house isn't a prison. It's a reminder. Your father wanted us to protect it, not destroy it." She didn't pull away. Her thumb moved once beneath my palm, a nervous, looping motion, as if she were testing whether touch still meant safety. The paper shook in her other hand. She looked down again, as if the letter might change its words if she read them enough times, and then she reached for the next envelope. The ribbon's tired knot loosened with a small sigh, the sound of years letting go. "It's his handwriting," she said, not to be persuaded, but to anchor herself to a fact. The capital E on her name, the careful way he crossed his T's. She traced the familiar geography with her eyes, the way a person studies a map to be sure home is still where the legend says. She read silently, lips moving. A single dry laugh, brief, incredulous, escaped her when she reached the sentence about the pressed rose petals from the day she first toddled across the lawn. "He kept that?" she asked, and then shook her head before I could answer. "Of course he did." Outside, a truck downshifted, metal clinking, then faded. The butter-yellow walls reflected the pale strip of winter light that fell across the table. In it, the velvet box looked almost black. Emily noticed it only after a while, as if its darkness had gathered enough gravity to draw her gaze. "What's in there?" she asked, voice hoarse from what it was trying not to say. I opened the lid and turned it toward her. The sapphire greeted the morning with a small, steady glow. "Your great-grandmother's ring. Your father kept it safe." She brought her hand toward it and stopped short, as if she'd reached a patch of air that pushed back. Her eyes glossed. The ring blurred into a blue star. "I thought you lost it," she said, and the word lost carried years in it. The move, the missing box, the way we'd both searched the same drawer twice, insisting the fault was with the drawer, not with fate. "He kept it for when you were ready," I said. She nodded once. Her throat worked around words that didn't come, and she returned to the letters as if they were a rope and she was over water she didn't trust. She read the one dated in late autumn, the one about ambition being a tool and not a shelter, the one that listed the joists and the shims and the nail he finally sank flush in the third stair. Her shoulders softened by degrees I could measure like a carpenter's notch. Then she found the photocopy of the cashier's check. The paper made a different sound in her hands, stiffer, official. Her eyes ran to the amount and then narrowed, calculating backward to the semester when a scholarship shortfall nearly forced her to drop a class she needed to graduate on time. "He never told me," she said, almost accusingly, but the target of the accusation dissolved before it could land. Her mouth opened and closed. "I told everyone I did it on my own." "You did the work," I said. "He built the scaffolding." She looked up sharply, ready to argue, then stopped. A flush rose along her cheekbones, not the hot red of anger, but the slow, spreading color of someone realizing a private myth as to be rewritten in public. I was so sure I had to prove something. That needing help meant I'd failed. She tapped the check with the back of a fingernail. He made it so I wouldn't have to fail. He made it so you could choose what failing would mean, I said. There's a difference. Her eyes returned to the letters. She unfolded another sheet. One of the earlier ones, the ink darker, the loops more certain. Her lips moved as she read. I mistook speed for purpose. She stopped, blinked, swallowed. He knew, she whispered. He knew exactly what I'm like. Because he knew exactly what he'd been like, I answered, low. For a long time she simply read. She did not speak, and I did not interrupt. The clock added its small, necessary ticks to the air. The furnace hummed and paused and hummed again. A neighbor's dog barked twice and decided against a third time. The ordinary world continued because that's what it does when two people are experiencing an unordinary hour. Somebody somewhere still buttered toast. She came at last to the first letter, the one that had sent my own hands to my face in the basement. She read it aloud, haltingly, as if sound might make the meaning fuller. Emily, I know you are strong, but strength can become cruelty if you do not remember love. This house will one day test you. When you doubt your mother most, she will show you this. The word cruelty snagged. She winced at it, flinched as if the syllables had edges. Her eyes lifted to mine. I've been... She couldn't finish the sentence, not because she didn't know the word, but because speaking it would make it live between us. She tried again, softer. I've been unkind. You've been frightened, I said. Frightened can look like unkind. Her jaw tensed. I told you to disappear. And I heard the part you didn't say, I answered. Which was I can't bear this ache another minute. She let out a breath she seemed to have been holding since the kitchen door clicked behind her the day before. It left her slightly smaller, and in that shrinking I could see the child who used to slide notes under our bedroom door when she was mad. I am running away to the backyard, but I will be back for dinner, as if the structure of home could be protested but never revoked. She ran her thumb along the edge of a page, not to fidget, but to feel the paper's tooth. I didn't want the house, she said, because every room tells me what I lost. I thought if you sold it, the rooms would stop talking. They would, I said. But the loss would not. Her gaze flicked to the ring again, then away. I kept thinking you were weak, clinging to the past, refusing to be practical. She swallowed. I told myself I was trying to save you from yourself. And what were you saving yourself from? I asked. She didn't answer. The silence didn't demand it. It simply waited. She placed the letter flat on the table and smoothed it once, twice, as if pressing a garment before wearing it. Do you think he knew I would say those things? She finally asked. That I would come here with a realtor on speed dial and a speech about equity in elevators. He knew you, I said, and he trusted what you could become when you were asked to remember. Her face changed then, not a sudden transformation, not an operatic flash of remorse, but the slow, visible untying of a knot. The muscles at her temples released. The set of her mouth softened. She looked like someone who had been told the answer to a riddle and realized it had been available all along, if only she'd been willing to hear it. She reached toward the velvet box again, not for possession but for contact. Her fingertip touched the rim and held there. He wanted me to have this. When you're ready, I said. Those were his words. She nodded and drew her hand back, as if understanding that readiness is not a switch, but a room you enter by degrees. She looked at the letters, now spread like a fan, and then at me. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything yet, I replied. You only have to read. She did. She read the apology for the college argument and the admonition to temper pride with tenderness. She read the inventory of the basement wall, how he'd sistered the joists and tested the shim with his weight. She read the line where he wrote love leaves a paper trail, too. Each sentence seemed to strip a layer of varnish from her insistence that pain could be solved by logistics. When she finished, she stacked the pages carefully in order, aligning corners like a clerk at a courthouse window. She breathed, one steadying measure, then another. The tears had dried on her cheeks, but left their track, the way rain leaves a clean path through dust on glass. She looked past me, through the window above the sink, to the garden where the rose canes were still bare. He used to cut 3 for the table and leave the rest outside, she said. I'd get mad because I wanted a big bouquet. He said the bush should look like itself. I remembered. Not like proof. Her mouth tilted. He would say that. She rested her hand near the letters, not on them, as if to let their presence speak without the weight of her fingers. I came here ready to fight, she said. I brought all my angles and arguments. And then, she paused, searching. Then he met me in his handwriting. He's been waiting in these pages, I said, for the morning you would need him. Emily nodded, and the gesture felt like the slow turning of a key. She reached across the table, palm up, the same small hand that had once held caterpillars and permission slips, and later apartment keys to places I had to map on my phone. I placed my hand in hers. For a moment we simply sat like that, mothers and daughters do, bridging years with skin and silent grammar. The clock ticked. The furnace breathed. Sunlight moved a fraction across the wood. I don't know what happens next, she said. You don't have to, I answered. This moment is enough. She squeezed once and let go. Then she angled the first letter toward the light and read the opening line again, the warning about strength without love, and the promise that the house would test her. She didn't cry this time. She didn't argue. She let the sentence stand in the room like a beam, load-bearing, and invisible to anyone who wouldn't think to look up. The letters lay between us, the ring a small blue answer that did not demand to be worn. The house listened. It seemed to settle, the way houses do when morning chooses them overnight, boards adjusting, joints affirming their agreement. I could feel Richard's absence without it hollowing the room, the way a well can make a landscape truer. Emily drew a breath that sounded like acceptance of the present tense, nothing more and nothing less. She placed her palm, finally, on the stack of pages, lightly, as if blessing them, and kept it there, steady, as if learning the weight of what love had asked us to hold. For the first time in years, Emily and I sat together in silence, not in anger, but in grief, in memory, in love. The silence wasn't empty. It was shaped by all the words we had flung at each other and all the ones we had been too frightened to speak. It felt like a room we had not dared open, and now that we were inside, there was air. She cradled the velvet box in her left hand and the ring in her right, as if she couldn't yet trust the two to belong together. The sapphire caught a narrow ribbon of morning light, and did not dazzle so much as steady the eye, blue like a reliable sky after a hard storm. She turned it slowly, the facets sliding through brightness and back. I wanted you to move on because I couldn't face the pain, she said. Every time I looked at this house, I saw what I lost. I thought if you sold it, I could finally breathe. I know, I answered, and found that I did. The knowledge arrived the way a song returns, already learned, finally remembered. Her confession broke something open in me, and what spilled out wasn't accusation, but its opposite. I had called her hard in my private accounting. I had stacked her insistence beside the tax bills and let it weigh too much. In truth, she'd been trying to outrun a wound by changing the scenery. It is a common mistake. Whole cities are built on it. We cried together. not with the awkwardness of two people unaccustomed to tears, but with the relief of those who have been asked to hold too much alone. Tears traveled the routes anger had taken the day before, and washed them clean. She leaned forward, and I let her forehead rest against mine, the way we used to brace each other when she was small and storms sent the house creaking. I felt her breath warm against my cheek. I felt my own breath lengthen to meet it. The clock took up its work in the corner and kept time for both of us. When we could speak without breaking, she set the box on the table with a care that acknowledged its history without making a ceremony of it. "Don't sell the house, Mom," she said. "Let's keep it for Dad." Relief moved through me with a physical clarity. It loosened the muscles that had knit themselves into caution. It brightened the edges of the butter-yellow paint as if someone had washed the walls. It did not erase the ache. It simply let the ache sit where it belonged, no longer masquerading as a problem to be solved by a realtor. "We'll keep it," I said. The pronoun pleased me more than I expected. We gave the rooms a different architecture. It rebuilt the hallway between us. She brushed the pad of her thumb over the ring, as if testing the smoothness of the gold. "He must have planned every part of this," she murmured, "even the quiet." "He had a gift for the quiet parts," I said, "the ones that look like nothing and hold up everything." She smiled without showing teeth, like shimming a joist on a Tuesday and never mentioning it. "Exactly." We didn't move from the kitchen, but the house changed around us, the way a body shifts once a weight is no longer pressing the same nerve. The furnace cycled and felt less like a question. Footsteps sounded in memory on the stairs. Their echo did not sting. Outside, the roses were still bare canes, but now they promised a future that didn't demand proof to be believed. Emily turned the ring again. "I don't deserve this," she said, not theatrically, but in the simple way a truth is admitted when no audience is expected. "You deserve your father's love," I said. "The ring is only its witness." She nodded. One efficient, grateful nod, and the economy of it reminded me of Richard when he accepted a kindness he hadn't asked for. She placed the ring carefully back on its cushion and left the lid open, as if closing it would misinterpret the moment. We sat with the letters spread between us like a map of a country we had always lived in, but never learned to name. She picked one up, an earlier page, the ink strong, and read the line about anger being light in the hand and loud in the mouth, while love is heavier, but it holds. She read it twice, then slid the paper toward me, the way a student passes a note not to gossip, but to share a small, important discovery. I read it aloud, slowly. Saying the words changed them again. They sounded less like instruction and more like a law of physics we had finally noticed. "I told myself selling would make me free," she said. "I didn't realize freedom sometimes means choosing to carry what matters." "That's the trick of it," I said. "The heaviest things are often the ones that keep you from being blown away." We fell quiet. The house answered with its own small noises, the refrigerator's hum, the dry tick of hot water settling in the pipes, the barely audible complaint of the third stair as temperature shifted its grain. I thought of how many mornings I had resented those sounds because they emphasized my aloneness. Now they sounded like a language I could speak with someone beside me. She looked toward the doorway, toward the marks on the frame where her heights had been tallied. "I remember you making me stand so straight," she said. "I hated it." "You hated the pencil," I said. "You loved the numbers." She laughed, brief and honest. "I loved winning at growth." "You did very well," I told her. She leaned back in her chair, eyes still damp but amused now, too. "I've spent years proving I didn't need anything from anyone. And all this time, there was a paper trail of help right under my feet." "Help isn't a verdict," I said. "It's an ecosystem." She tilted her head. That sounds like something Dad would have said. Only if he'd been reading the pamphlet from the county extension office. We smiled at each other without apology. Affection returned to the room the way sunlight does on a winter day, obliquely at first, then decisively. Her gaze lowered to her hands. "I am sorry," she said, and the words did not sag. They stood. "For the way I spoke to you. For trying to turn grief into a transaction." "I am sorry," I answered, "for letting the house carry what I should have shared. I built an altar out of it without asking if you knew the prayers." She exhaled, not quite a laugh. "We're not very good at asking, are we?" "We are learning," I said. She reached again for the ring, and this time she set it in her palm, rather than between finger and thumb. The blue deepened against her skin, as if the stone remembered wrists and pulses. She didn't try it on. She only held it, and in that restraint was a new kind of respect for the object, for her father, for herself. "Do you think he meant for me to wear it right away?" she asked after a while. "I think he meant for you to know it was yours when you recognized yourself in the woman who would wear it," I said. "That takes exactly as long as it takes." She absorbed that with a seriousness that felt like gratitude and like relief. "Then I can wait," she said. Yes. The kettle had never been set for tea, but the moment had the feel of cups between us anyway. We didn't fill it. We didn't need steam to make the air visible. "You know," she said, eyes on the window, "I kept imagining that if we sold this place, I would walk into some new life and everything would be crisp and white and easy. I didn't picture any of the sounds, neighbors arguing through the wall, elevators beeping, the Holloway shoes echo in a hallway that doesn't belong to you." She paused. "I didn't picture the absence of roses." "We can prune them together when the frost passes," I said, and let the sentence end there, offering nothing beyond what the season itself promised. She nodded again. We let time be present tense. Somewhere down the street, a mail truck rattled the curve and set off a short chain of barking. The world had resumed its unpaid job of continuing. Emily gathered the letters into a neat stack, the same way she had aligned corners earlier, but now with an ease that suggested she understood order was a kindness, not just a compulsion. She slid the bundle toward me, then drew it back halfway and left it there, centered between us like a shared ledger. "We should read them again," she said softly. "Not because I doubt what they say. Because I want to hear him in different hours." "We will," I said. Her eyes moved to the doorway, once more to the notches on the frame. She rose and crossed to it without hurry, the way one approaches a mirror one has avoided. She put her fingertips lightly on the wood, not to measure, but to remember. "Here," she said, touching the notch labeled Emily, 7th grade, 5 feet. I thought being this tall would fix everything. She laughed at herself, not unkindly. "I guess I thought every new inch meant you didn't have to be afraid anymore." "It only changes the view," I said, "not the weather." She returned to the table and sat. The ring still lay cupped in her palm. She closed her hand around it, not as possession, but as pledge. "I want to keep the house," she said again, as if repetition could carve the decision into a beam. "We will," I answered, and found the words settled with a healthy weight, no longer a threat to the floorboards, simply part of what they were built to hold. We sat like that for a long while, not planning, not tallying, not assigning jobs to the future. The relief didn't rush, it expanded. It found the pockets where bitterness had been stored and filled them with something usable. The room dimmed by a degree as a cloud crossed the sun and then brightened again, not the dramatic show of a storm, just the ordinary proof that light is steadfast even when interrupted. When we finally stood, it was not the start of anything so much as the end of the argument we had both needed to outgrow. The house seemed to recognize it in the small cluck of the heater and the easy way the stair accepted our weight when we stepped toward the hallway. No protest, no strain, only the quiet agreement of wood doing what it was made to do. Richard's last request had been fulfilled, not by me alone, but by the daughter who finally understood. Relief washed through me again, lighter this time, more like breath than weather. I felt it settle in the space behind my ribs and behave itself. The ring gleamed once in Emily's hand and then rested, and we rested with it, the house around us alive, patient, and at last, uncontested in its purpose. The house still stands today, not merely intact but corrected, its frame remembering how to bear us without strain. It breathes the way old houses do, and the day warms the siding and evening cools it again, boards answering in their small, honest language. Its walls don't just hold memories, they hold the record of a rescue. Where grief once echoed and made every room sound larger than a person could fill, a truer acoustics has returned. Our voices at table, the kettle's modest hymn, the comfortable hush after a shared laugh. What was once a museum of loss has become a home again, the same materials reassembled around a different truth. Light does different work here now. Morning slides across the butter-yellow paint and stops to rest on the letters, which I keep in a shallow drawer by the telephone. Reachable, not displayed. I take them out sometimes, not as proofs in a case long settled, but the way one takes out a tool to be sure it is still sharp. Paper remembers touch. It grows more companionable with the oils of our hands. The ribbon has softened under repeated tying. The words have not. They stand as quietly as beams. Richard's sentences ask nothing of the day except that we live it with the steadiness he wanted for us. I have learned to hear the house and the letters as one voice. Hold, hold, hold. And though my daughter once shouted for me to disappear, she comes every Sunday now, always at the same not quite noon, when the block has settled from the week, and the church bells 2 streets over are finishing their last patient peal. She brings flowers, sometimes roses if the season is kind, sometimes mums, sometimes supermarket bouquets made brave by dyed blues and citrus yellows, and sets them down beside the back door before she takes off her shoes. For Dad's roses, she says, as if the offering must be declared to count. If it's winter, she tucks the stems into a pitcher on the sill and jokes that even a sleeping garden likes company. If it's summer, she leaves them on the porch table where the breeze lifts the paper a little and makes a sound like pages turning. We don't announce what the visit is about. It has no agenda. She comes because Sunday is what the week understands, and because walking into this kitchen no longer requires bracing. Sometimes she sits in her old chair and adjusts it a fraction, the way a person tests a memory for fit. Sometimes she stands at the sink and traces the thin crack in the enamel with her thumbnail, a habit she had as a teenager when thinking out loud would have felt too vulnerable. She asks for tea. I set out 2 cups. Neither of us rushes the water to boil. There is time enough inside a good day. The ring lives on the table between us more often than on her hand. When she lifts it from the velvet and places it in the shallow dish Richard once used for loose screws, she smiles as if greeting a neighbor. She has tried it on twice, once to feel the circle meet her skin, once to test the weight, and then she has slipped it off with care that says both mine and not yet. Readiness is no longer a dare between us. It is a room with an open door. On the Sundays when she leaves the ring in its nest, the blue still finds her. It gathers in the rim of the cup, in the vein at her wrist, in the sky square past the window where the sparrows stage their small arguments in the lilac. The house remembers her in practical ways. The door frame keeps all its pencil notches, a ledger no one is tempted to sand away. The 3rd stair, once guilty of snagging socks, takes our footfalls without complaint, the nail sunk all the way down by a man who could no longer climb them when the work was finished. The porch rail, rubbed smooth by years of palms, accepts her hand as she steps out to leave the Sunday flowers on the table, and in that easy transaction I hear Richard's voice, not in sorrow, but as instruction well learned. The small work holds. We have not cured sadness here. The point was never to disinfect the rooms. The point is that sadness has been given correct proportions. It does not command. It attends. You can feel it in the last inch of steam from the kettle, in the way we sometimes stop talking at the same moment, as if cued by a conductor, in the quiet look we share when the church bells start up again for some wedding we do not witness. The pain has acquired manners. It waits its turn. It does not try to sit in every chair at once. What redeems a place is not ceremony but use. I have learned this by washing the same plates and by standing in the same patch of light on winter afternoons, and by hearing week after week the knock I no longer brace against. Emily's visits do not arrive to correct or compel. They arrive as habit, good habit, the kind that rescues a life not with thunder, but with a level and a pencil. We talk about weather more than we talk about grief. We talk about her work in the way a person speaks who knows ambition is a tool and not a shelter. When she mentions a decision she once would have framed as a victory, she now describes it as a repair. I know where she learned the new grammar. She knows I know. We let that be enough. There are days when she reads a paragraph from one of the letters out loud and then closes her eyes, not to dramatize, but to let the words seat. There are days when neither of us touches the drawer, because we do not require witnesses, because the love that left a paper trail is also present in the room, ambient, doing its modest work like a furnace doing what a furnace does when no one is applauding. On those days, the house carries us with no more effort than gravity. Outside, Richard's roses answer the seasons with the quiet courage of perennials. They sleep when sleep is right, leaf when it is time, and bloom without commentary. Emily has learned to cut 3 for the table and leave the rest outside. Let the bush look like itself, she says, almost under her breath, the phrase fitting her mouth as if it had always belonged there. The first morning she said it, I did not look away. I nodded, and the nod contained a whole history. The daughter who has put down something heavy, the mother who has stopped counting the cost aloud, the man whose counsel still operates like a level held to a board. The redemption the walls hold is not a parade of miracles. It is a series of small refusals to betray what a family learned the hard way. The house refuses to be drafted into the service of denial. It refuses to cooperate with bitterness. It refuses to lend its corners to resentments that prefer shadow. It insists on its ordinary beauty, sunlight on clean wood, water boiling, 2 cups, a ring resting, letters within reach. In that insistence lives the mercy we needed, a place faithful to more than memory, a shelter that also keeps weather where it belongs. Sometimes, when Emily leaves, we stand for an extra second on the back step, as if measuring the day. She squeezes my shoulder in passing, a simple gesture that does the exact job it advertises. No subtext, no apology, no claim. She gathers her Sunday bouquet again, if the roses outside are waking, and taps the stems against her wrist to shake off the last drops. Same time next week, she says, and the sentence has no suspense in it. It is a promise already kept. The house no longer divides us. It unites us, under one roof and within one understanding. What we once tried to solve with transactions we have learned to answer with presence. The structure holds because we have chosen to hold, one to the other, without spectacle and without hurry. This is the relief, the mystery promised all along, not the erasure of pain, but a way to live where love bears the larger share of the load. Richard knew it would be this way. He knew not as a man betting on sentiment, but as a builder who had spent his life trusting materials to do what they were made to do when properly joined. He left a blueprint in ink and in joists, in ledgers and in the discipline of cutting only 3 roses. We followed it. Now the house stands, neither shrine nor storage, but the simplest and hardest thing, a home that tells the truth and makes that truth livable.